I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando, where we truly go beyond the veneer. You'll experience the raw and the real of leadership. We've talked to startups, we've talked to financial institutions, we've even talked to dads. But what about a company that's graduated from the startup stage to now being a publicly traded company? How's that different? How's it the same? If you're ever curious about how managing and leading a company changes as it grows, today's episode's for you.
Chip, that's very true. I think those of you listening today are going to be surprised at what today's guest, Gene Austin, who is the CEO of Bazaarvoice, has to say about how it is really different. I've had the chance to know Bazaarvoice. They're out of Austin, Texas, since really the early days when they were a startup. Today, they are a publicly traded company. In that journey, they've been through a lot of different seasons of growth and transitions. It's one of the things I love about doing this podcast and the guests that we get to talk with is they're very raw and very transparent. And I think you're going to find that to be true with Gene today.
So how has Bazaarvoice changed over the years?
Chip, you'll hear it in Gene's comments, but companies need to change based really on where they're at in their stages of growth. It's really what we talk about, the different stages of growing up. We use the analogy of climbing Mount Everest, but think about it, another analogy, think about it like the human body. We have different requirements for growth, not just physical, but, spiritual, emotional, mental, from the time that you're a baby versus when you're a full-grown adult. The same is true with a company. Listen in as Gene talks about how he leads and manages this publicly traded company. He talks very candidly about how he manages differently in a publicly traded company, how he selects and works with his board of directors, and a whole lot more that I think you'll really learn from and enjoy. But first, learn a little bit more about what Bazaarvoice does from Gene. So tell me a little bit about Bazaarvoice, what you guys do, and how you serve the market.
Sure, Kirk. Good to be with you. So Bazaarvoice is about a $200 million business focused in the e-commerce space. I would imagine most of your listeners shop online, and they probably use ratings and reviews to help them make decisions about which products they're going to purchase. We are the predominant provider of software that allows retailers and brands to collect and display reviews on the internet. We serve all the brands and retailers outside of Amazon. So think of the biggest retailers in the world and their associated brand partners. So we've been doing ratings and reviews for about 10 years, and now we've been diversifying our product into other types of content and actually, expanding our revenue base from a variety of different methodologies, but our core product was ratings and reviews. I came up through the sales arena in technology. I started my career with Hewlett-Packard, got an MBA, then migrated into mostly marketing roles in the technology arena, mostly again with hardware folks. And then in 1996, joined my first startup as head of sales and marketing with careerbuilder.com, which is still out there today, 20 years later, as a giant job site. I was employee number 10 or 11. Took that public during the days of the bubble. Came back to hardware for a short stint, but then found myself as CEO of a nonprofit software business, $5 million called Kenvio. Was able to, as the CEO, my first CEO gig, run that up to about $100 million, take it public, and sold it. And then I became the CEO of Bazaarvoice in May of 2013.
What is your first memory of being called to be a leader, and how did you feel about it?
It was interesting. I was a Boy Scout as a child and was a Boy Scout for 7 years. And I think when I was 15 or 16, the St. Louis Area Boy Scout Council, about 3,000 scouts, decided that the annual St. Louis area camping outing, or camporee they called it, was going to be scout-led. So the scouts were going to plan it and run it. It was, everybody shows up Friday night and leaves on a Sunday. So I volunteered to be a part of that team, and my scoutmaster must have recommended to the adult that was kind of overseeing the team that I should be they should give me a shot at running it. So, I ended up being the head of the Boy Scout planned camporee when I was 15 or 16 years old. So everything from how many latrines we needed to handle the scouts' needs, all the way to campsite layouts, to the program, the itinerary. All that stuff was done, and it was I was already a leader in my troop, but this was when I think when you ask me the question, what is a great leader? It is the ability for someone to motivate and inspire individuals where you don't really have direct authority over to go reach a common goal or common set of goals. And, yes, I technically was the boss of these scouts, but they didn't know me from Adam. And I was only the boss because a guy in the room said I was. So I had to learn the hard way I had people that were kind of like me and wanted to get stuff done really quickly. And I had other guys that were not like me at all. And I needed to figure out, okay, so how do I inspire this person and get them excited? And, that's what leadership really is taking a group of people where most of them are not like you at all, but getting them excited and rallied around a cause and an event or a change, and then turning us into a unit that's going after a common goal. So that was probably my first experience. It worked out well.
How'd the weekend go?
That was great. I mean, I can remember at that very early age saying, wow, this is very cool. And having a successful event that you lead is addictive. It's a little bit like a drug because, I do love being an effective leader. I love being able to motivate people and moving them forward. And that was my first real taste of it.
Yeah, you are very good at it. You truly are one of the this is not just giving compliments, cheap compliments. I really believe this. You're one of the best CEOs I've seen in that regard. I think you truly do get that helper's high.
That's true. Absolutely.
From making that difference. We all have a memory of our first opportunity to lead. That I really like how you kind of thought about that, because too often, especially at a young age, I think we do associate leadership with a position or someone thrusts some authority upon us and, we just abuse it. And what I heard you say is you realized that you just were kind of a conduit for the most part. You had some results you needed to get, and there's a ton of people who were trying to get there, and you had to figure out a way to, earn their trust and get the influence to make it happen. I think if more leaders took that approach, it'd be huge.
Right. Well, I mean, if a CEO approached their world, and I think the most effective people do, is forget about who works for who. It's just getting in the room and getting everybody excited about, what the future holds if we're successful here.
So what do you think are some of the differences between being a CEO for a publicly traded company versus a privately closely held business?
Well, I think it kind of depends on your style as a CEO. My style as CEO is to be as transparent as I can about how the organization is operating, what's working and what's not in the business. And I do that through emails, company meetings, et cetera. And so obviously the biggest change when you go from private to public as a leader is that you have to be, if you're too open, you end up making the entire company insiders into what and how the company's performing. And that doesn't serve anybody any good. So you have to be a little bit more guarded with the information flow. But I've actually found that I can be almost as open as I need to be. I just have to be more careful about the actual specifics of the statistics of how the company's doing. So that's one. The second thing I would say as a CEO of a publicly traded company is about 20% of your time is taken up as being a public CEO, and that is frequent investor meetings, obviously quarterly calls to Wall Street about how the company's performing, preparing for those calls because those calls are all highly scripted. It's not just sit down with some PowerPoints and go. So that takes up quite a bit of time. And so as the CEO of a publicly traded company, you have to change the way you communicate with the company but yet try to maintain the culture that you think keeps the business moving in the right direction. And then your time is down. So you've got to be tougher on yourself about what's really important as the leader of the business when you are time slicing across shareholders, customers, and your employees.
So you said something there about, as far as maintaining the culture that's going to help be successful or even improving upon it. Talk a little bit about inheriting a culture, and maybe not even a culture that is one that you would have shaped?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. Bazaarvoice is actually in a transformation. I inherited the business in a little bit of a lull, a valley, if you will. The business was a high flyer from 2008 to its public offering in 2011. Didn't really raise a lot of money, grew like crazy, and then hit some rough spots. And so when I came in, I was in the middle of, the company was in the middle of processing its first set of rough spots. So I was concerned as a leader coming into a culture saying, do I have a culture that is ready to take stock of the past and make changes to make the future better? Because the company needed to get to a different chapter. It needed new products. It needed to go to market differently. It needed to compete differently. There were a number of things to work on. So the way I went through the culture assessment is I looked at the team and I talked to a lot of people and I said, so is inherently in this company a desire to win, be successful, a view of that what we do matters, and so they're enrolled in the mission and what we're trying to do. And I got a strong yes on that. So I said, okay, so I think this is a culture that can endure change. The second phase of that is obviously as you're implementing change and putting in change, there are things about the old culture that you kind of want to drift away and let go. And there are new things you want to bring in and reward. But you also still want to have that same energy in the culture. So it's a little bit of a dance. I'm a big culture person because I believe execution is the reason businesses succeed and fail. And behind all that execution is the team. So it's important to me to have the type of culture that is rewarding the right attributes, celebrating the right successes, but also taking stock of the right failures.
So that's interesting. That is very, very true. It's kind of the hearts and minds of the people that are actually having to execute. If you're not in tune with that, obviously, or you read it wrong, a lot of times you can identify as we have an execution problem when the reality of it is it's something that's going on culturally. What are some things maybe at a more granular level that you do to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of things, whether it be one-on-one meeting with your direct reports, skip level things, cadence around operating reviews? Just what are some different things that you utilize to make sure that you really have got both the execution side but also the culture side kind of understood?
There's a bunch of things. And one of the things that I think all CEOs need to, in larger organizations, now startups are very different, 25, 50, even 100 people, different. But as your organization gets bigger, you will find that as the CEO, as you have one-on-ones, you're not always getting the straight scoop, right? There are people that are just not comfortable leveling with you about what's really working and what's not working. So the first thing I do is I have trusted advisors throughout the organization. These are people that I know, I've built a relationship with, and I know if I'm going to get the straight scoop on how things are working, how an initiative is feeling, how maybe something I said in a meeting is playing out in the organization. The second thing I do is I do have frequent lunches with various groups. And the lunch is very simple. It's a wide open, what's going on, how you guys feeling, what's working for you, what's not, to get people talking. And I usually don't get this part of the company is really a problem for me commentary, but I will get enough that I can say, I need to go poke in this area. So it usually gives me enough of an indication that I know where to go poke. And just one of the things of a larger company as a CEO is you just have to be comfortable with nuances in commentary, because people just feel like telling the CEO bad news, as much as to me it's the best thing they could do. It's hard for people to walk in and they think they're telling me my baby's ugly. And you just have to be comfortable with that. Like I said, there are people that will do it, but there's a lot of people that won't. So you have to pick the ways you want to get the information you need so you can assemble the story.
And I think you are really good at this, Gene, is what you just said is you always hear about how lonely it is at the top. And I think it's oftentimes because I think as leaders, we get judged in a vacuum and out of context. And you're exactly right. It's not that they want to withhold truth. It's just kind of hard, like I said, telling somebody their baby's ugly. But I think you've done a very good job. What I heard you say is building some trusted advisors inside the organization, people that can, that you've spent the time with, now you can handle the weight of the truth with. And that's something I really think is missing in a lot of organizations, is being intentional about building those bridges. The other part of what you said that I thought was really interesting is, and it's very subtle, but you're very intentional about doing these things. It's not something that you wait till there's a crisis or there's a problem, but you're setting up lunches, you have these trusted advisors, and you are getting ahead of the problem by being intentional about just keeping your finger on the pulse.
Yeah, I think you have to, because the tone from the top is, I think, a very important concept, meaning what tone am I setting? What's on my mind? What are the priorities that I think I want everyone in the company to realize is going on? And be able to do that effectively, you kind of have to know, where everybody's mindset is, especially in a company that's going through a lot of change. And we're going through a lot of change. We've had to transform our strategy. We've had to cut back some initiatives. We've had to recently let a few people go. And so all of that causes, one of the things I have found is that no news is always taken as bad news. And so, when you go through a lot of change, you need to be out there with communication about making sure everybody puts change into perspective, that while we're making some tough decisions, at the same time, it's going to let us focus on what the core parts of the business. Because if you don't over communicate during times of change, people tend to run negative. And so staying close to all of that's really important.
Yeah, I always say the road to heaven does go through hell, and it's your choice if it's a day trip or a daily trip.
Right, exactly.
And I think that communication is so critical to make it just a day trip, because there's never been a company that hasn't hit rough times. It just doesn't happen. But
exactly.
One of the things that I'm curious about, and I think it's your style, you even said being very transparent, is just kind of how you operate and how you've learned to operate. So not everybody listening to this has a board that they work with, especially the type of board you have in a publicly traded company. But often as I'm talking to people, they're thinking about putting a board together, even if it's an advisory board. Talk a little bit about, you want the bad news. You want to know the reality of things so you can react accordingly. How do you use your board to help you get better? And how do you, communicate to them when you're seeing things that you think they need to be aware of? Yeah,
a board is a very interesting entity in a business, and it's one that I, in my early days, misread. It's easy for an early CEO to say, okay, the board's my boss. They're going to set my agenda. They're going to set my priorities, and they're basically going to tell me how they think the company needs to operate. And that happens at times, but for the most part, the board is a sounding board more often than not to the direction you want to take the business. And they're a course correction type of entity, versus you're not going to walk into a meeting and they're going to tell you what to do. It's your board, right? So for CEOs that are forming a board in a private or public company, the board is your board is what you invest in. It's what you're going to get out of it. And so, I think it's important for the CEO to step back and say, what's going on in my company and where am I going from a market standpoint, and how should that dictate the types of resources and individuals I want on the board? So give you an example of Bazaarvoice. I'm in the middle of changing the business dramatically. I have someone who's been through 3 or 4 transformations as an executive and CEO. He's a great sounding board to me as I see changes in culture, changes in people, thinking about doing something fairly important. How should I roll that out? Great sounding board. I have someone who has run a large company from a CEO perspective, so I can ask questions about how does a company get to another level from a scaling standpoint. I'm in a very new market that I don't understand that well as a CEO. I have a person who comes right out of that market to help me understand kind of, the nuances of that business. So those are 3 examples of, in a private company, when you're venture backed, a lot of your board is venture capital, but eventually you're going to have to start formulating an independent board and be thoughtful about it, because what you put on it and how you invest in it is what you're going to get back out of it. And it's an important part of being a CEO.
There's a significant amount of wisdom that you just shared there. I want to pull out some very salient points. It is very critical, and this is a mistake I see, especially in younger executives or CEOs that have not dealt with a board before, is they do have this assumption that the board is going to be there to kind of tell them what to do. And if you allow that and you approach it, it will happen, because oftentimes the board's made up of people that have kind of been there and done that, have some success. That is kind of where their muscle set is. And so if you hand them the keys, they will, it's almost unintentionally, but they'll take and run with it and kind of give you that direction. Now, more mature boards and stuff like that understand that that's not their role, but oftentimes I see where they get young CEOs completely wrapped around the axle versus what you just said was be very intentional about, one, knowing your direction, knowing where you're wanting to go, and then accumulating in a very purposeful way board members that are going to help round you out and help you kind of deliver on that vision. And it's two entirely different paths, but it's so subtle, and it is a mistake that's made where you just think, I'm going to go get these all-stars and they're just going to kind of tell me what to do. And I can't tell you how much time I spend just, coaching and counseling CEOs that have a board that has got them, they've almost, this is an extreme, but they've almost stopped running the business and they're spending so much time just trying to manage their board that it's not helpful.
Right. And being proactive with the board about these are the topics I need your help with and your insights on is the only way to be successful with the board. Because if you kind of just leave it there, they're going to all of a sudden become CEOs. And they're going to get into more detail than you want them to get into. So being able to say, here's how the business is running. We'll spend a few minutes on that. Now let's talk about areas we're having challenges with and get your insights. And I think that's the chemistry and that's the makeup for a successful CEO board relationship. Invest in your board as a CEO. It's a very important part of helping you be successful.
Yeah, that's a ton of wisdom right there. So you talked a little bit about BVs and a transformation, and one of the things that's no one's favorite thing to do, but just thinking about how do you think about going, you guys recently, you said had some layoffs and stuff. How do you go about thinking about just the talent of your direct reports, people that report directly into you, as well as other team members? And then when you do have to make those decisions about layoffs and stuff, just share a little bit of insight, what your process is in approaching that.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, the one thing I have learned, because I have been a CEO of a $5 million company and now I'm a CEO of a $200 million company, and just laying it out there is that it's unusual, as an example, to have the same vice president of sales in a $5 million company and a $200 million company. And early CEOs tend to say, wow, I've just hired these three people. This is great. My team is set. And most likely the answer is your team is set for a period of time, but the skill sets for a head of services at 25 million and 100 million are very different. And as a CEO, you need to appreciate that. And as you network around your marketplace, look at what people are doing in sales and services and marketing at various size companies and think about how that plays into your role. So when you think about your leadership team is a continuous improving entity. And the CEO that says, I'm set as a leadership team level is usually the one that's going to get surprised in the wrong way. So you always have to be thinking about, every year I go through each of these individuals and I say, are they in a position to help us get to the next level in the next 2 or 3 years? And if they're not, what is it that they need? And if that's too big a gap, then it's time to start thinking about, what to do in the future. So, and that's the same with the CEO. Same thing with us. So we can scale out as well. On actually taking people actions, I think the most important thing is always start with the business. And we went through and saw areas of the business that we had a new product as an example, and it launched with a lot of excitement. But when you really got into the data, which is obviously where you should always go into the data, and you looked at it, it was never going to be a business that mattered dramatically for us. And so with a lot of initiatives going on, we said, we're going to pull out of this. always hard decisions. You go at home, lose sleep because you know people's jobs are going to be eliminated. And I can tell you, as tough as it is to come to that decision, it is always a relief on the other side, because it's always, you wake up and you go, wow, that was the right decision. As tough as it is on the people side, it was the right decision. The company feels more energized, even though it was sad to see people go, because we're focusing. And so, as hard as those decisions feel on one side, once you get to the other side, you realize that they can be very invigorating and actually help the company get to another level.
Yeah, what you just shared is very, very helpful, because I think there's a lot of people that are listening that are probably on the front side of those decisions, and just the fear of the unknown of what's on the other side. But what you just provided is, I've gotten that consistent feedback. When you get to the other side of it, there is an energy that happens, like I said, just getting the focus. It's not fun because you're impacting people's lives, but it's your job. You've got to be able to do that. There's other people that are depending upon you to make those decisions. But I see too many times where people just wait until the results of not making the decision show up. And then it's obvious what needs to happen, but it's usually you're scrambling at that point.
Exactly. And so it's always looks harder. People are going to quit because they think the company's failing. People are going to quit because their friends are no longer with us. There's all kinds of fear in these decisions. But every time you get to the other side that I've been on, I've never regretted one of those decisions. I'll put it that way. In fact, I've asked myself, how come I didn't do this a quarter earlier?
Yeah, that is a very common theme that I hear very often. So how do you handle those gaps? I think it's one of the toughest things. So when you recognize somebody that's been a top producer, has really actually helped you get to where you're at, and now you say, this person's getting ready to scale out, how do you handle those gaps? What kind of conversations or insights do you provide?
To me, it's obviously you start seeing a gap and you have the conversation with the individual about, I'm seeing this happening on a more consistent basis. What do we need to do to kind of limit it? And, frequently it's a scale issue. They were very good at managing a team of 30 or 50, and now their team's 100, and they're thrashing. They're not able to have, the one-on-ones with their team that they need to kind of keep the cadence going in the right direction. They're not able to manage all of the decisions in there, or they're having a hard time delegating because they used to make all the decisions themselves. And so, it's really important to have an open, transparent conversation about what does it take to get you to the next level. But at the same time, I don't beat around the bush. And, normally if you're doing it right and you're having a lot of frequent conversations, you and your executive get to the same spot, meaning this is something we can fix or this is something that may not work. You get to the same spot fairly quickly.
Yeah, I want to highlight something that you pointed out there. It's kind of subtle, but I think it's important, is oftentimes, and you even kind of said it earlier, sometimes we make a decision and we go, wow, why'd we wait so long? And as I coach and talk to executives, that's something they always say is, gosh, I just waited too long. Obviously, there's significant business impacts. There's impacts to the people that are around them. We hear stories about people leave managers or leaders. They don't leave companies. And oftentimes I see they waited too long because they felt like, well, I haven't really given the guy a chance or the girl a chance. I haven't really explained what I need. I haven't been totally clear. And so it kind of goes on and the more it goes on, the more they kind of avoid the conversation. So the subtlety of what you just said, just identifying it early, having the conversation, saying, hey, I'm starting to see a pattern here. I'm starting to see this. But having that, so when it comes time, there's usually either they've gotten the self-awareness that they need or they make the change. But just the point is, have the conversation early.
Have the conversation early and always have a very open pipe with your leader about what you see that you're really excited about and what isn't working as well. And I'm going to tell you that it is so easy, and I've done it myself, to leave someone in a job thinking that another quarter or another this or another that is going to turn it. And I would tell all the CEOs is when the little voice in your head says, I think you've got a problem here, you're right. That voice is 9 out of 10 times right. And don't bury it. Take action on it.
You won't want to miss part 2 of my interview with Gene, where he'll talk about 2 very important parts of any CEO's cadence. He's going to talk about management framework, not just about how they come up with strategy, but more importantly, ensuring that it actually gets implemented and executed on. And he's going to also talk about how he treats his one-on-ones with his direct reports. Great stuff. So here's some things I want you to think about today's conversation and reflect on. Are you ready for growth? I mean, are you really ready for growth? Do you understand the journey ahead of you and understand where there will be peaks and where there'll be valleys? And is your team ready? Have you got them prepared, and do you know how to go about doing that? Also, think about what Gene talked about, making tough decisions. He said he's always happier on the other side of them. But too many times, right before a triumph, there is some kind of difficulty, and it's usually in a decision, and it's usually wrapped around people. Think about that. Is there something that's holding you back from making a tough decision that may, interestingly enough, be blocking your ability to grow personally or help your organization grow? I hope you're enjoying this podcast for you leaders as much as I am. I'm learning every time I get to sit and talk to these leaders. They are some of the world's most dynamic, authentic, and well-accomplished leaders. And the things that they are sharing are real, and they're raw, and they're transparent, and they're here to not just learn from, but they really are here to help you. I would greatly appreciate if you would take a minute and provide us a review, good or bad, either way. If you provide us a review, you can go to foryouleaders.com. Once again, that's foryouleaders.com or iTunes, and leave us a review. I hope you have a great day.